guys, it's Alice, and today I'm going to talk about the books I read in the last part of November. The first thing that I read was Doom Rolled in Glitter by Lena Norms. This is a zine and it's filled with poems all about the author's experience of being in her 20s. So I've been following Lena Norms on YouTube and Instagram for years now, and I really like her poetry. So when I saw she was coming out with this, I was very excited and it did not disappoint. The poetry in here feels personal, probably because it is. Some of it feels kind of intimate, and there are so many lines in here that I just read over and over because I like them so much. I mentioned this in another video, but Spaces in the Sky, a poem Lena wrote when the Notre Dame was burning, is one of my all-time favorite poems, and that one is in here as well, and it's so good. This also obviously has a gorgeous cover, and there are 3 other drawings in here that sort of separate the collection into 3 parts, which I think worked really well, and I also just personally love the style of this artwork. This is definitely one of my favorite poetry collections that I've read all year, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And I really hope Lena comes out with more poetry because I think she is an excellent poet. The second book that I read was From Here to Eternity by Caitlin Doughty. This is a nonfiction book and it explores death and its rituals, and the author, who is a mortician, has traveled around the world to see how different people and cultures care for their dead, and that's what we get to read about in here. I loved this book. I thought it was so interesting and it was really easy to read, and I feel like I learned so much. Now that I've read this, I realized that I've never really given much thought to how we deal with our dead in my culture. Like, the only thing that I've ever experienced is I guess a typical church funeral, like with the Protestant church. And I don't know why I've never thought about it, but I didn't realize that things were so different across the world. Like, people go about this completely differently, and I thought that was so interesting. I really loved getting to know these different people and seeing how they feel that the dead should be honored. The author makes a point of showing us that being around the dead and having a greater connection to them is quite common in other parts of the world. Like in Japan, there's this bit in here about how relatives will pluck the bones from their loved ones' ashes after they've been cremated, and they put that into an urn, which sounds maybe a little morbid, but it was actually a really nice ritual somehow. There's also a bit in here about sky burials, which I mean, who even knew that was a thing? I thought that was so fascinating. And just everything in here was really interesting, and I loved getting to see how different people have different connections with death, and they have different thoughts about it. And I also like that this explores both modern and old ways of dealing with this. The book is also illustrated throughout, which I really like because you get to see different places and different rituals, and there are even some pictures of like corpses and people's heads and stuff like that, which you would think is a little odd maybe or creepy, but it actually isn't, probably because these are drawings and not actual pictures of like a mummified skull. I just really like how this book sort of opened my eyes to how different people deal with their dead and grief, and how we sort of have to allow space for it, and how different things work for different people, which I just think is so interesting. And I also kind of appreciate that this book is a little funny every now and then, because it sort of allows some chuckles amid all of this heavy stuff. Although the book doesn't really feel heavy or overwhelming, the topic is obviously kind of heavy anyway. I just feel like this was a great introduction to this, and I just really loved it, so I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read some more poetry, and it was Pillow Thoughts by Courtney Peppernell. And this collection is about love, heartbreak, and loneliness. I don't really have that much to say about this, to be honest. There's nothing wrong with it, it just happens to not be my thing. The style of this is just a type of writing style that I don't really enjoy or find all that moving. And the themes in here are quite universal. Like, I think a lot of people can relate to a lot of what is in here. But for me, I just felt like the exploration of those themes felt a little, maybe a little juvenile and a little cliche. There's just not a lot in here that really moves me the way that my favorite poetry does. And I also think that maybe this could have been better curated. Like, if it was a little bit shorter, I think maybe it would have been better, but that's just my opinion. I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. I do think there is an audience for this. Like, maybe if you're a little younger and you're experiencing a lot of things for the first time, this might be good. Second to last, I finished Killing and Dying by Adrian Tomine. This is a graphic novel and it's basically a short story collection. So there are 6 stories in here, all of which are, of course, illustrated. This is a book I've had on my shelves for such a long time, and I'm always really pleased with myself when I get around to books that I've had for ages, even if I didn't enjoy this as much as I had hoped I would. There are some things that I do like about this. I think the characters in these stories are quite interesting. Some of them are kind of unlikable, but that makes them sort of compelling, I think. I also like how these stories deal with everyday life for these characters, and I like that it doesn't overly explain everything. It leaves some stuff up to the imagination, which I really enjoy. I did, however, find all of the stories in here fine when I was reading them, but kind of forgettable when I'd finished them, and now I can't really remember any of them, to be honest. I do like that the stories deal with ordinary life, but I feel like they sort of lack that thing that makes the story special and actually worth reading about. There's also the art style, which there's nothing wrong with, but it's just not really an art style that I particularly like. I have seen so many reviews praising the art in this to the high heavens though, so I'm guessing I'm in the minority, but I just didn't really like it. I do love the cover though, and I love how this dust jacket thing is like see-through. I really like that. I kind of wish the whole book was like that, but I don't know. It does match, but I just didn't really like it. So overall, I was a little disappointed in this, I'm not gonna lie, so I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. Lastly, I finished 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. This is a non-fiction book, and as you may know, this author also wrote Sapiens, which takes a look at our history as humans, and Homo Deus, which takes a look at our future. And this sort of sits in the middle of those and explores the different challenges that we are facing in our current time and in our immediate future. I really liked both of Harari's previous books, and I feel very much the same about this. I really enjoyed it and I thought it was very interesting. I really like reading this author's books because I always feel like he has these thoughts and insights that I've never considered before. And his writing style is so accessible and readable, and it's never difficult to understand, which is quite a feat when you're talking about all of these big, complex, and complicated things. And I just thought so much in here was fascinating, even if it was sometimes a little anxiety-inducing. I do think, out of the 3 books that I've read by this author, this by far feels the most opinionated, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it makes for a little bit of a different reading experience. I also felt like this book had more lulls than I remember his other books having, and there were some parts where I felt like he kept harping on the same thing over and over, and it got a little bit repetitive. Not a lot, but enough that I noticed. This offers a lot of food for thought though, which is why I think these books are so interesting and worth reading. Like, there's always something fascinating and compelling about what Harari chooses to write about. So I give this a 4 out of 5 stars. Now, because it is finally December, the book that I've just started is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. I always reread Harry Potter this time of year, and I'm reading these illustrated editions because they're just so gorgeous and it's such a treat to read, and Harry Potter is just always wonderful. Okay guys, those are all the books that I had to talk about today. I'd love to know what you guys have read lately and what you are currently reading, and I'll see you soon. Bye!